Chris Hrabe, scoopswithdannymac.com. Buddy, thanks for joining us. You got Cards and Cubs, Wrigley Field, but two teams below 500. Can you feel the buzz for this series this weekend?
It's funny, Charlie, because I think that over the last couple of years, there have been these Cardinals Cubs meetings. It seems like a lot of them have happened at Wrigley Field that have been really seminal moments in terms of the season, in terms of where the two teams were headed. We saw the Cardinals a couple of years ago effectively end the Cubs season at Wrigley and then clinch the National League Central at home against the Cubs. We saw the Cubs not only knock the Cardinals out of the postseason when you and I were both at Wrigley Field in 2015, but end a couple of Cardinals years as well. So this is kind of a different meeting. And I think that over the next week and a half or so, the meeting between these two teams, while they might not necessarily determine playoff spots or determine how a team continues to advance in a postseason, they could determine kind of the short-term and maybe not so short-term future of both clubs.
So give us your take on the Cardinals. I was listening to Adam Wainwright talk the other day about the fact that they had the best record in baseball for the first about 6 weeks of the season. And I forgot about that. I forgot about that with the way, especially June has gone. Here they are now entering tonight's game on Saturday, 3 games below 500. What do you think has happened here? What's your take on the Cardinals? How do you fix this?
Well, I think that we saw a couple of things. First of all, I think we saw the schedule catch up to them a little bit, and we saw them struggle against some good teams. And we also, I think, saw maybe their depth or lack of depth a little bit catch up to them. I think that over the last year or two, everyone in baseball, every organization has really had their depth tested because of the schedule last year, because of some injuries and, some, I think, unique circumstances that the stoppage last year and the pandemic and the way rosters have kind of been organized have presented. So the Cardinals, unfortunately, have been hit in the pitching department. And I think that we've seen how important Jack Flaherty, how important Dakota Hudson, how important the health of guys at the front end of the rotation are so that you can kind of fill in the back of the rotation. The last couple of years, I think the Cardinals were very fortunate that guys like Flaherty and Hudson and even Adam Wainwright were healthy so that if you were filling in and if you were needing to find innings, you were finding them at the back end of the rotation. But all of a sudden when, a John Gant has to be counted on to throw like a number 1 or number 2, I think you get exposed a little bit. Michaelis as well, the things we take for granted, the things that every January and February, we're listing off 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys for 5 spots in the rotation and then kind of backfilling the bullpen. That's a luxury that the Cardinals have had. But really, for the first time in a while, I feel like the pitching depth or maybe the lack of pitching depth, the guys that are the next batch are maybe, the Matthew Liberators, the Johan Oviedos who are still a little bit away. That's catching up to them a little bit. And, certainly when you're trying to patchwork your pitching, you're going to run into a lot of issues, both from I think, logistical standpoint, a roster management standpoint, but also a competitive standpoint.
Yeah, and I think especially starting pitching, you mentioned there's been a ton of injuries. So that is a factor. Right now they have 5. They have a whole rotation with Carlos Martinez hitting the IL on the injured list. I think some of, especially the bullpen pieces, can pitch better. But when you look at the offense, and we like to play the who's to blame game, and a lot of people, me included, I've pointed my finger at Jeff Albert. I think he has to be better, but also it's on the players to also work on their craft and improve. When you look at the offense, what's going wrong in your mind? How do you change that? Is it more Jeff Albert? Is it philosophical? Is it some of these players? What do you think?
It's the same question that we've asked over the last handful of years, Charlie, and I can't say that it's a lack of doing anything in the offseason. You've had blockbuster type moves in Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt, even I think going back to the Marcell Ozuna trade. You've traded for MVP caliber players. It's just that for whatever reason, it hasn't worked. I think the biggest thing that you can point to is that, from a development standpoint, or over the course of a season, you're not seeing the team or individual players improve in certain areas of weakness. And I kind of at times roll my eyes when we play the hitting coach game. It seems like in all of sports, there is no other coach who might have less directly to do with production, but gets blamed more frequently than anyone else. At least in football, an offensive defensive coordinator, they're calling the plays, right? So the hitting coach is often the sacrificial lamb. And I guess the thing that perplexes me is that even if it would just be symbolic or sacrificial, like the fact that they haven't done anything to change things up. You can move a guy from eighth to second. You can move the leadoff guy down to sixth. You can move the same pieces around, but unless you're doing something to alter those pieces, you're going to expect the same results, right? So I guess I never would have thought that that would be the answer, but at this point, maybe I'm shocked that they haven't really done anything because oftentimes that's kind of like the unplug it, plug it back in of baseball. It's like the fire the hitting coach and then see if things start moving in a different direction. So, at this point, like I don't know what more you can do to shake things up unless you move guys out of the coaching staff or off the roster.
As we speak right now, the Cardinals are 9.5 games back in the Central in fourth place. They're 9 games back in the wild card. And to get that wild card, you'd really have to jump over about 6 teams where they're at right now. Do you think the Cardinals, if you had to put a percentage, can they make a run? Can they get in the playoffs? Do you think they'll do anything of significance to try to help that cause?
Well, I know Fangraphs puts their playoff odds last time I checked this morning in the single digits, right? And it's a really hard ask because of how strong some of the teams in contention for the wild card are. It's not in their DNA or their pattern of past practice really to give up on a season, to wave the white flag. I'm not expecting them to do that, but I will say, Charlie, that as tough as this can be maybe for fans to swallow, sometimes we're seeing how a soft reset or maybe a 1 year kind of approach to a quick rebuild, a rolling rebuild can help. Look at the Boston Red Sox. I mean, they've got the 4th pick in the draft this year. It seems like every couple of years they end up with a pick in the top 5 or the top 10 because certain years in which they're not contending and that division is so strong, the American League wild card is so strong, they're able to move some money out, give some young guys some opportunities. And if some losses stack up, so be it. They end up picking, in the top 5, the top 10 of the draft. That's not a luxury the Cardinals have had. And I'm certainly not equating this to, football or basketball, where a team that's struggling can, tank, so to speak, and end up with a top 5 pick that's going to instantly impact your club or instantly be up next year. But I will say that I think there's something to be said for being realistic. And instead of maybe, clinging to single digit playoff probabilities, saying, okay, what can we do? Who can we get a look at? How can we handle guys for the last 2 months to optimize not just the rest of this year and their development, but moving forward, optimize next year? Maybe they do end up with a top 5, a top 10 pick. I don't think that would hurt, right? Like, again, it's not going to be, Joe Burrow coming in next year or quarterback that's going to help your football team right away. But certainly, I think it's hard. I can't blame the organization for always wanting to try and get to the postseason. I moved to St. Louis in 2013, and I think that there have been 3 calendar days in the regular season that the Cardinals have ever been out of contention mathematically since that time. So that says a lot. And I never did a insignificant pregame or postgame show in St. Louis. So you can't really blame them for that. But at the same time, I think it's fair to say what's best, long term for the health of the club.
So, Chris, obviously, you're from the Chicago area, worked in St. Louis for a long time. So you have a great perspective on Cards Cubs, really from both sides. Give me your best or a couple Cards Cubs memories from over the years.
Oh, man. That's a great question. I was at a game, the McGuire Sosa home run year, where I believe John Lieber had a perfect game into the 6th or 7th inning, then ended up giving up like 7 runs, and the Cardinals absolutely crushed the Cubs. Let's see. I remember the Pujols So Taguchi game when the Cubs were up like 10 runs, and the Cardinals came back and won. I've been to so many great games back and forth between the Cardinals and Cubs, but I guess my most jarring memory or the most memorable moment that I've had was in 2015, being at Wrigley Field after Game 4 of the NLDS as the Cubs beat the Cardinals and won their first playoff series since the first round of 2003, which was also a game that I was at. before losing to the Florida Marlins in the Steve Bartman series. So it's been pretty incredible. More than anything, I think that watching the Cubs' ups and downs honestly gives me more appreciation for what the Cardinals have been able to do over the last couple of decades and just how hard it is to win in Major League Baseball. I think that I'm really excited to see where the rivalry and where the division goes from here. I think the Cubs are in really good hands, especially with Dan Kantrovitz involved now with their drafting. He, of course, his first draft with the Cardinals was 2012, which was the Michael Wacha and then Patrick Wisdom draft. So Wisdom in the mix for the Cubs now, and it's a great rivalry when both teams are really, really good. When both teams are relevant, when both teams are in the mix, there's nothing like it. I mean, I don't know about you. That's the loudest, I think, probably ballpark pound for pound that I've ever been in was, games 3 and games 4 of the 2015 NLDS. So it's been fun. Selfishly, I would love if both teams got back in the playoff race this year and made things interesting. But, something interesting always seems to happen with the Cubs and Cardinals, regardless of, what's at stake from a baseball perspective or from a playoff picture. Always something memorable seems to happen.